Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beyond Deadlines, a podcast where we tackle challenges that schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah, and I am a scheduling manager for Intel.
And my name is Greg Lawton, and I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Each podcast, we designed it to give you frameworks, tactics, and strategies that you can implement right away. Today's challenge is project acceleration. I'll be asking the questions, and Greg is going to be on the hot seat. So, Greg, you ready to jump right into it?
Let's go for it.
All right. So, you are a director of scheduling at a prominent consultant. You've been dropped into the construction of a new nuclear facility in which there are signs of early schedule delay. The CEO of the construction company has requested you specifically and has asked you to accelerate the project to protect her margins. What do you do?
Okay. As always, I need a bit more detail on this one to start. May I ask some questions?
No, 0 questions. Keep it short. We're on the time. This project's got to be accelerated. You got to get into this.
Got it. Okay. Right. So, first of all, how behind is this program?
Well, let's say, this nuclear facility is a 3-year build. And let's say that it is behind anywhere between what the team thinks 3 to 6 months.
Okay. Are there any indications of why it is behind?
Right now, the initial feedback is that design packages are being released late and out of order. And that is causing then downstream cascading effects.
Got it. Are we responsible for design?
No.
Okay. What is the contractual mechanism for the end date?
Contractually, this is a P80 agreed to project.
So we actually have agreed to a Monte Carlo simulation in the contract. So movement to P80 date is counted as delay, not just deterministic date.
Correct.
Got it. Okay. And protecting her margins, that tells me that there's some kind of incentive structure here or some liquidated damages. What is sitting on the project?
On the incentive side,
yeah,
there's going to be heavy revenue implications if they don't start serving power. They have contracts with local governments, municipalities. They need to fill demand. There's lots of megawatts to be served on the revenue side. For the client. On our side, there's to protect that revenue. There's heavy delays or LDs. So you miss.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, let's say in magnitudes of these will dramatically change their income statements. Their earning statements, I should say, when that company goes to report.
Got it. Okay, so to summarize,
a little more than they can chew.
Okay, so to summarize, the project is between 3 and 6 months delayed. I'm just going to take that as fact. Obviously, we'd go and do an investigation in the team. I'm just going to take that as fact. The reason for this is late and out of sequence submissions of design packages for my teams to deliver. We're not responsible for the design. That will be a client handover point. We've agreed a P80 position with the client, and the goal is to accelerate the project to protect margins because there's heavy LDs. Okay, cool. So the strategy that I go about in this is I would actually go for statistical acceleration as opposed to deterministic acceleration. And I'll explain that in a second. And I would go for a heavy focus on responses to change requests. So, for example, the fact that we're getting client-driven change, i.e., we're getting design packages that are out of sequence and late compared to the required by dates, essentially is a client-driven change. And I would be doing a full change analysis of each of those in the sequence in which we are informed, and then we receive confirmation of that happening. Now, why I'm saying this is because if there's heavy LDs as opposed to an incentive-driven mechanism, what my goal is in terms of acceleration and inverted commas here is to push out the agreed P80 date as long as possible, whilst at the same time implementing actions within our own organization that pulls the P80 date in as much as possible. And I want the biggest difference between the P80 agreed and the internal P80 that we're running to. The difference in those two is our margin.
So, question for you.
Yep.
And this is going to be a little bit chronologically out of order, but now I'm intrigued. So let's rewind back the clock and say you were advising the CEO of this construction company.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times, packages, a couple of them will make contractual dates. But if your design packages aren't contractually set up to say, hey, this is when I require the packages,
Mm-hmm.
then you're on sand. You have nothing to say. They will just deliver, and there'll be some high level designs, but they can play shuffle in between and cause a lot of chaos to your downstream construction. So if you
Yep.
were advising the CEO now, hypothetically, before that, how to set up those design packages in a way that then protects and actually increases the value of the analysis you're going to talk about later, how would you
Mm-hmm.
do that?
So it's a little bit of a sneaky answer, just because of the way that the contract's been set up in terms of heavy LDs and lots of design packages coming in. What I would do is I would have a, a strategy of interconnection and a strategy of separation, and I'll explain those two. So those design packages are required to start construction works. And at the start, we would build up a schedule and a program of works that uses those in the order that's best suited for the build, that maximizes the productivity and the utilization of resources. However, if there's in this situation where there's no upside and lots of downside, I would play safe ball. And what I would do is I would have a plan B, which essentially isolates design packages far before the construction actually starts on a design package. And I would put a large amount of float in on our side from when these things are being delivered. And I would isolate them as much as possible so that a delay to a construction package doesn't actually change our plan that much and our productivity rates. It's the whole disruption. So, and this is why I'm saying it's a little bit sneaky. If what we want is, if there is going to be a lot of client-driven change or the potential for it, or if it happens, it's only upside to us. We want to be able to isolate that as much as possible, as opposed to it rippling through our works.
Right. So let's jump back forward. You're
Mm-hmm.
talking about there is statistical analysis, and the other one was probabilistic,
No, statistical and deterministic.
deterministic.
Yeah. Basically,
Fancy word.
deterministic
Give me
is
the explain it like I'm 5 for both of them. Quickly.
deterministic is I take a ruler and go through, and I literally look at the last milestone and go, what's the date of when we deliver that? Probabilistic is I wobble everything in the program and I measure what the end date is, but because I'm wobbling it, it moves all over the place. And the P80 is 80% of all dates in that wobble finish on or before this date.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's say for sake of time, because I think people can probably Google and look up on YouTube how to perform some of these statistical analyses. Let's say you perform those and you've now come up with a different hypothesis as to why the schedule is delayed. I'll let you riff off of that. But how do you take now this different hypothesis of what's delaying the schedule, not the design packages, and then redirect this project team and then drive forward an acceleration to fix your new hypothesis.
Got it. So let's imagine that the thing that is actually disrupting is variability in productivity. So I've got some teams that are really productive and some teams that aren't, and for some reason I can't spot who's who. It's actually the uncertainty of task duration delivery, which is the thing driving it.
Well, here, how about actually this? Let's make it more concrete. Pun
Yep.
intended. I'm just kidding. It's not going to be concrete. But let's say you came up with two. You have late release of permits,
Mm-hmm.
and you have a late release or a late mobilization of your contractor, or of your team, your mobilization, your on-site team, and your subcontractors. So you actually have two driving factors. One predominantly on the client side, and let's say one that's actually driven by you. It wasn't like a design or a funding
Yep.
release issue. You just couldn't get it together in time to get people mobilized.
Mm-hmm. Are they mobilized right now in this scenario?
Yeah, let's say they mobilize, they just
Okay.
mobilize late.
Got it. Okay. Well, what I would do in this situation is actually look backwards rather than look forward to start with. The looking backwards is I would be going about a delay and disruption, a forensic analysis, to try and show that the late release of permits happened first, and therefore it can be argued that a late mobilization was rational on our side because we don't want to mobilize before a permit has been acquired, because that would actually put us in a strong position to have a disruption event, a delay event. If the late mobilization of people happened and was evident, very evident before a design permit came in, which would be surprising actually, because it depends on how you do this. Then we'd be on a weaker footing. So it's almost in this situation, I'd be trying to prove the scenario of I'm late, but you were later first.
Very nice. Very nice. Walk us through a little bit of what you say delay analysis. And I guess how I want you to approach this is not so much the specific steps, but these analyses need to go back and be reported to people. So
Yep.
you'll probably be speaking to the client. You'll probably be speaking to the CEO. What does that analysis look like? Is it a presentation, a Word doc, Excel files? What are kind of the high level bullet points?
In summary, it's a bunch of pictures. So you're on the right hand side, you've got the milestones that matter. So it's, I don't know, project end date or a main concrete slab laid or whatever. And on the left, you've got every branch that comes from that, and you've got the source of a delay. A delay to a milestone either happens because that milestone in isolation was delayed, very rare, unless it was a design permit give, that kind of thing. Or it happens because things before it that are connected to it happened late. So it literally is, you can draw it with a crayon if you need to. You're tracking back to see what was the thing that pushed the milestone first and the most.
Ooh, and actually, don't mean to jump in, but we're getting off. It's like I feel all of our conversations go back to delay. This one is on acceleration.
It
So let me
is.
tweak my question a little bit. You're now having to pitch an acceleration. So what does that look like? Because you're going to need to obviously get something to accelerate the project. Money,
Yep.
resources, something. Usually it comes back to money. But
So
now you need to convince people this is the acceleration. This is what it looks like. This is how we're going to go execute it.
So this project actually has something in it that makes describing the acceleration much more complex, and it's the fact that it's a P80 agreed date as opposed to a deterministically end date. A deterministic end date is very easy to understand to accelerate because you'll have the critical path and you just say, let's do that faster. And at some point, you'll do it so fast that another path is actually slower than it, at which point you try and accelerate that path by just doing things faster. Now, then you get onto how do you do it faster? Well, there's a million ways to do it faster. You change your calendars so you work double shifts and you work weekends. You get twice as many people involved. You can be clever with getting better equipment, whatever the case is. Because we're dealing with a statistical end date, which is where you've wobbled everything, the main way you actually accelerate a statistical end date is by increasing the predictability of delivery of all tasks near the critical path, which could be an incentive structure, and it still can be all of the techniques that we just talked about. And you get rid of risk events. So, for example, if there's a risk that there's going to be heavy rains in October and we've got to do lots of concreting, you might want to invest in building massive marquees to make sure that if it rains, the concrete can still set. That is a risk investment because if you take that risk out of the model, the P80 date will move left, which is acceleration, and you'll have to spend money. It's just that you're spending money on buying a marquee to make sure concrete sets predictably, as opposed to spending money paying people overtime at a weekend. It's slightly more complex, but it's as simple as that. It would be, if we fix this risk, this project would go 6 days faster. A day is worth $1 million. 6 days is worth $6 million. To fix this risk, we need massive marquees. That will cost $2 million. $2 million is less than 6. We'll save 4. It ultimately is as simple as that.
That's super interesting. Super, super interesting. Okay. So let's say you've gone through the analysis, you've done your pitches, you have got the accelerations approved. You walk me through how you then go manage those accelerations to ensure that they're executed effectively. I think we've all been on projects before where let's do overtime and double shifts and do all this stuff. And then you never actually know whether if it's going to work or not sometimes. I mean, sometimes you end up in this fog of gray. So talk me through some specific tactics and strategies of how you then make sure that acceleration that you've pitched and got approved for and now are going to spend more client money on is actually worth what they're spending on.
Beautiful. So this is where soft management comes in, because in this situation, I'm the director of scheduling, and it is other people who execute risk actions. It is the risk team, it is the project managers on the site and the superintendents, and it's the engineers. So just what I do as director of scheduling, I find out where opportunity is and I quantify it. I then rely on my colleagues to go and execute it. Now, what I can do to assist that is to make sure that people really understand what exactly we need to do in order to get the result. And what I can do is I can measure how the implementation is happening in order to update the plan and to rerun the models. So, for example, let's say that we put a marquee up and it protected us from the rain, but the moisture in the air made the concrete set 20% slower. Then we don't have the 6 days. We have 5 days because we've had to wait an extra day for the setting to happen. And I would recalculate that model. Now, we've still made profit in this situation, but you have to actualize it. Where it gets very complicated is when changes start happening under the surface. So if we've got the money to go do this risk action and we're doing it, and then another client-driven change comes in, which we then agree to, the baseline shifts. So ultimately, there's one element which is supporting people to actually execute, and then there's a very complex element which is comparing apples to apples over time so that I can prove that we've made the money that we were forecast to make.
Very good. Very good. Apologies for the delay finding the mute button as I have little ones running around in the background screaming who probably don't want to be on this podcast. Well, that is all the time we have today. We like to keep these podcasts short and very, very tactical and useful. And so while, Greg, you and I could probably go talk about this for another hour, we'd probably just end up circling back to baselines and delay management, where most of our conversations go. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts for the crowd before we jump off for today?
What I would say is that if you are in a project that has agreed a P position, then the rules of the game are more complex, or more specifically, you've got more weapons you can use to accelerate that project than if the rules of the game are a deterministic end date. And just knowledge of that, just going, how has our end date been agreed? And tells you essentially the weapon cache you have to use to accelerate these projects.
Excellent. Very, very cool. Well, we hope you enjoyed the recording today. As always, we look to see you next time, and feel free to hop on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and follow us, because we'll be releasing new episodes every week on Beyond Deadlines.